New York Giants need to have a productive offseason that doesn't include these 5 potential roster mistakes. I'll tell you what they are coming up next on the LockOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the LockOn Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the LockOn Giants podcast, part of the LockOn Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina P-Train, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for LockOn, of course, and for Giants Country, part of the Fan Nation Network. And I want to send a big shout out to my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, those, of course, who are part of the exclusive communities supporting Locked On Giants. And, of course, the newcomers and everybody in between. You're all loved and appreciated by yours truly. So thank you for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day. Or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Happy to spend the day with you here. So on today's Locked On Giants podcast, Joe Schoen, general manager, has a lot of work to do on this roster. And there's going to be some good moves he makes. There's going to be some mistakes he likely makes. So I'm going to give you my list of 5 mistakes that Joe Schoen cannot make, in my opinion. He cannot make when it comes to building this roster. So we're going to talk about those 5 on today's show. And again, as always, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Mistake number 1. Now, this one's going to be interesting because I know some of you are going to say I'm crazy for saying this, but hear me out on this. They have to tag Saquon Barkley if they do not get a deal done with him. Now, right off the bat, people are going to say, what, are you crazy that Saquon Barkley's got to go? Why would they want to tie up $12.419 million, which is the franchise tag amount, on a running back that's, another year older, coming off another round of injuries? What's the thinking behind it? Well, here's the thing, folks. Go down the Giants roster, if you will. And with the exception of really, Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, you could probably make a case for Bobby Okereke. You can probably make a case for Deonte Banks. But otherwise, who else on that roster is not touchable? Like if they were to get a call from another team asking for a trade of any of their roster players, who else besides those guys that I just mentioned would you say, no, we're not trading them? So that includes Saquon. All right. So the reason why I say, if they don't get a contract done with Saquon, that they should slap the franchise tag on him is because I believe they can still get something somewhere along the line for him. And what I mean by that is if it's not a tag and trade that is done before the draft and, Saquon plays out the year on the franchise tag, which I don't think is going to happen, by the way, but if that were to happen, the following year he walks, gets a new contract elsewhere, because remember, you can't tag a player more than 2 years in a row. The Giants will get some sort of compensation if he leaves, in all likelihood. So what better than way to ensure that you get optimal compensation than by placing the franchise tag on Saquon and trying to work something out between, the end of the tagging window, which is, I believe, the first week of March, and leading up to the draft. Because if you don't get a deal done, if Saquon digs in the way he did last year, and you don't get a deal done, well, as I've said before on shows, folks, the Giants are not in a position to carry him on the franchise tag this year, unlike last year when they were in such a position, financially speaking. So if you cannot reach a deal with him, you know what? You look to trade him to somebody who will take him on and give him the contract he wants. Meanwhile, as the Giants, you get in return at least one draft pick figure, they should be able to get a third round pick, I would think, if I had to take a guess on what his value would be. Third round pick, remember, I mean, that's what it costs the Giants to get Darren Waller. So third round pick is not that bad of a deal. You probably can even get a conditional pick somewhere along the line for Saquon Barkley if you do a tag and trade. So those of you who say, you know what, just cut the cord, let Saquon walk out the door. No, he's not a guy that, I think people are gonna, he's a guy that I think people are gonna want on his team, on the team. And, for those of you who say, well, why not just do a straight up trade? You can't trade the guy until you have a contract. So, if say, for example, the Bears came calling tomorrow and said, hey, we'll trade you for Saquon. Well, until he signs a new contract, they can't trade him. So tag and trade, to me, that is why I am beating the drum on that. Whether or not Joe Schoen agrees, we'll see. But that, to me, is a mistake they cannot make. And that is, again, if they don't get a deal done with Saquon, slap the tag on him. I think that is just the utmost importance. All right. Mistake number 2 that Joe Schoen cannot make this offseason is the quarterback situation. Now, we all know that Schoen has said that the team has to address quarterback. Tyrod Taylor is going to be an unrestricted free agent. Daniel Jones is coming off of the ACL. So they're going to have to add preferably someone who can start if Daniel Jones is not ready. And whether that someone is Tommy DeVito, if you read between the lines, you kind of think, maybe that's not the direction they want to go in if they don't have to. But here's the thing, even if the Giants add a veteran who can start for them if Daniel is not ready to start the season, they still have to, in my opinion, get a young quarterback and just reset. All right. So we talk about the Giants trying to rebuild with Schoen and Dable, the process having started 2 years ago. But it's not a true clean out process because, they were still trying to figure out what they had in Daniel Jones. They got quality football out of him the first year. Last year, not so much so. And now he has the injury. And, as I've said on the show before, he just hasn't worked out here. And it's not necessarily his fault. It's a combination of factors. But how much longer can you continue on with this and say, oh, well, if we do this or that, maybe next year will be the year. Maybes don't fly in January, folks. All right. At some point, you got to say, look, we've gone through every possible scenario. It's just not working out. Time for a clean break. So to me, I feel the Giants need to get a quarterback. Now, do they need to get the quarterback necessarily in the first round? Ideally, you would like that, but just, drafting a quarterback in the first round doesn't guarantee that you're getting a stud. I mean, it increases your odds, obviously, but you can just as easily get a bust as you can a stud. So I would say if I'm the Giants, a mistake that they cannot afford to make is overlooking the quarterback position in the first 2 rounds. That's where I would look for a quarterback if I were them. Now, obviously, it's going to be best player available and how does the board fall? But that's how I would approach it. Now, would the Giants consider trading up? It's possible. I don't know that they would. That's going to be kind of a steep climb to go from 6 to number 1 to get ahead of, Washington and the Patriots, both of whom who are believed to need quarterbacks. But, maybe that's a gamble Joe Schoen wants to take, depending on how he does in free agency, which is why I often say, let's see how free agency rolls out before we worry about the draft. Now, as far as Daniel Jones goes, they're not cutting him next year. To do so would mean they would incur a $69.315 million cap hit. They don't have that kind of space, folks. So Jones is going to be on the roster next year. The escape hatch is after 2024. So if they do take on a young quarterback to be the future, Jones, you can pretty much say that he's going to be a lame duck quarterback if he's ready to start this year and if he serves as a placeholder for the young talent that potentially would be coming in. All right, I have a few more things on my list. Remember, I have 5 mistakes that I don't want to see the Giants make in rebuilding the roster. I'll give you the next few coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NFL playoff field has dwindled down to the final four teams, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. You can bet on a variety of options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and score big this NFL postseason. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, P-Train, and Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you all day, every day, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast tomorrow, we're going to have Damian Parson, who is an NFL talent evaluator. He does work with the Draft Network. He is also one of the co-hosts of Locked On NFL Draft. So we're going to have him on because, hey, we got to talk draft, right? I mean, the All-Star games are coming up. The college prospects are going to be showing off what they got. So we have got to talk some draft with some of our experts. And I'm excited to have Damian on. I know you guys have seen him last year. Those of you who are my everydayers, you might remember him. He's just a wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say about the various prospects because Damian's really good as far as finding hidden gems. So he'll be on with me tomorrow. Do not miss the show. All right, let's get back to our list of mistakes that the Giants cannot make as they rebuild the roster in 2024, this coming off season. Mistake number 3, not getting another offensive tackle. Now, yesterday, I think some of you who saw that show thought, what's Joe Schoen supposed to say? Of course, he's going to say, Evan Neal can be a tackle. I get that. He could have also said nothing, Brian Dable, how many times have we seen him say nothing? Joe Schoen could have also sidestepped the question, as he did a couple times with a question that I know I asked. So, the point being is look, Evan Neal might very well turn out to be a fine tackle with different coaching. He might not. Do you really want to take the chance and say, we're going to hand this job to Evan Neal? I never really liked that, to be honest with you. And by that, I mean, I never really liked when coaches just hand the job to a guy. If you think about it, Evan Neal really didn't have any competition. It was almost like, because he was a first round pick, the job was his. I don't necessarily endorse that. I know that, if you're taking a first round pick, you want that guy to start from day one, but you'd like to think that he also earns it and doesn't, feel like, oh, okay, I'm a first round draft pick, so I don't have anything to worry about. So I'd like to see the Giants bring in another offensive tackle, not only to challenge Evan Neal, but if Evan Neal wins the job straight out, that backup offensive tackle now becomes your swing guy, all right? Because remember, Tyree Phillips suffered that late season injury. I don't know if he's going to be ready to go come opening day. He may not. He's also an unrestricted free agent, so I would venture to guess that the Giants probably won't re-sign him right away. They'll kind of just keep an eye on his recovery to see, how that goes before making a decision. But either way, folks, Matt Parrott, he's not going to be back. I'd be surprised if he is, as a UFA. The Giants have got to get another tackle, and not just a swing tackle per se, somebody who could be a swing tackle, but someone who can legitimately challenge Evan Neal for that job. Because to just hand it over to him, like I said, you're not doing any favors. And, competition can bring out the best in a guy. And I think we can all agree that we have not seen the best from Evan Neal yet. And, look, they say he's a hard worker. I know that he's a hard worker. I know he wants to do well, but got to see it on the field. And If they don't get that position fixed, then shame on them. That's all I've got to say about that. So, all right. The next item on the list, mistake that they cannot make, not adding another tight end. All right. Now, I thought last year, I'll be honest with you, I thought last year we would see a lot more of the tight end, because the rage seems to be you get a good tight end and you incorporate him more into the offense. Think of the Kansas City Chiefs, for example, with Kelsey. Think back to when Gronk played with the Patriots and Tom Brady. And, you figure Kafka coming over from, Kansas City, that would be an element they would incorporate. Well, they tried to with Darren Waller. And the problem is Darren Waller, back in the day when he was healthy and not dealing with hamstring issues, he would have been a good candidate to make that happen. The problem is he's been injured. All right. And as someone once said, injured guys are going to get injured. So Waller, I just don't know that he's the answer moving forward. I don't know that he's going to be able to give them 17 games. That hamstring is a chronic issue. Is it going to flare up again? So to me, you better get another tight end, because right now, I think the only other guy they have on their contract besides Waller is Daniel Bellinger. And Bellinger, for whatever the reason, they did not use him as much in the passing game as they had the year before. Now, granted, Bellinger, when healthy, is not the same athlete as a healthy Waller, but still, he's pretty good as far as, being a pass catcher and whatnot. But the bottom line is the Giants, if they're going to run more 12 personnel moving forward, they better find another tight end, because Waller, I just don't see him being the long-term answer. The guy, if you were to cut him, you're looking at a $6.7 million savings. Waller has the fourth highest cap hit currently on the Giants for 2024. I think we can all agree that they are not getting optimal value out of him. Injuries are not the player's fault. I get that. But when they have a history, that's something that you have to be careful of. And I just think that was a risk that the Giants took, and it just didn't pay out. And that leads me, by the way, to my next mistake that I don't want to see the Giants make. And that is, stop taking gambles on guys with chronic injury histories. All right. I get it. You think that your medical staff is the best in the world, that your training staff now is going to have maybe some kind of magic potion to keep this team healthy. But you know what? There are just some guys that, for whatever the reason, be it their build, how they take care of themselves, whatever the reason, there are just some guys that are more injury prone than others. And I don't know if you guys caught the show, but a couple shows ago, last week, I had Pratik Patel on the show, and we talked a little bit about injuries. Pratik used to work with Aaron Wellman during Wellman's first tour of duty with the Giants. Wellman recently hired last week as the executive director of player performance, fancy title for strength and conditioning coordinator. So the bottom line is, you want a guy who, if you're going to invest in a guy that has a relatively clean injury history, because if you don't, you're only going to end up spending big bucks on a free agent that you might not have available for all 17 games. And is that really the best use of your financial resources? I don't think it is. And again, injuries are going to happen. I get that. You could have a healthy guy come in and all of a sudden, boom, he tears an ACL. That's unavoidable. But if you have a guy with a history, I don't care how talented he is or what he did, 4 or 5 years ago. That was then, this is now. And that's a mistake I think sometimes teams make, is they go back and they look at a player's history and they say, oh, 2, 3, 4 years ago, this guy was really good at his position. People change. They get older and they either get better or they decline. So I just, when it comes to injuries, I just would not put a whole lot of stock in that if I'm the Giants. And, I would try to stay clear of guys who have injury histories, because that to me is concerning. All right. I've got actually a bonus one. I know I said I had 5 on my list. I've got one more for you coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking to head to Las Vegas for the big game, but you're struggling to find tickets, you need to know about Game Time. Game Time has you covered, plus, they have a little something extra for you. When you use the promo code Vegas100 on your big game ticket purchase, you'll get $100 off the price. Imagine what could you do with an extra $100 in your pocket while in Vegas? Play the slots or the blackjack table, visit the fine restaurants in the area, or catch a show maybe. Game Time has you covered with a wide selection of seats, and they're constantly offering last minute tickets, flash deals, and more on their vast inventory of tickets for concert shows, sporting events, and so much more. You can get tickets right up to and often an hour after the event starts. And with Game Time, you not only get the lowest prices guaranteed, you also get clear images of seat views and event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So go ahead and snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and don't forget to use that code Vegas100. That's VEGAS 100 to get $100 off your big game ticket. If you're not planning to go to Vegas to see the big game, don't worry. You can still get $20 off any ticket purchase with the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. That's last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed at Game Time. That promo code again for $20 off is Locked On. Terms apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And speaking of the big game, I'm going to end up kicking myself for not going to the big game. You know, it's funny. I was going to go if for no other reason, just because I like Vegas and I think I would have had a good time out in Vegas. But I said, nah, you know what? Go to the combine instead. That's more important for the Giants. And wouldn't it be something if the Detroit Lions end up in the big game? Boy, I'll tell you, I would be so happy for Dan Campbell, former New York Giant, now the head coach of the Detroit Lions. I don't know that they're going to get past the 49ers, but you never know. So good luck to all the teams who are, in the conference championship games coming up this weekend. It's going to be any combination of those four, I think, will make for a great, great big game. So anyway, let's get back to our topic, which is mistakes that the Giants cannot make as they retool the roster this offseason. And I really have just one more item that I want to talk about. And I think a lot of you probably can guess what that is. And that is the Giants have got to get a number one receiver. All right. Now, last year, Joe Schoen kind of downplayed it. He said, oh, look at all the number one receivers who are sitting at home. Okay, I get it. He didn't want to trade for one. He didn't want to spend assets for one. I get it. But that being said, just think what having a legitimate number one receiver on this team would do for the offense, whoever the quarterback is, whether it's Jones or a draft pick or whoever. All right. Think back to when the Giants had a legitimate number one, which I guess the last time you could say they did was Odell Beckham Jr. What did Odell do for the Giants offense? Does anybody remember? If not, I'll tell you. He often drew double coverage. He often created headaches for opposing defensive coordinators because the Giants like to move him around. He opened things up for the other guys on the team. So, yeah, a number one receiver, I'd say it's pretty important to this offense. And I think if you look at some of the better offenses in the league, they all have number one receivers. The Giants don't. What the Giants have is more or less right now a collection of number two, number three guys, complementary pieces, right? They have a solid group, I think, with Darius Slayton, with Jalen Hyatt, with Wan'Dale Robinson. That's a solid core right there. You re-sign Isaiah Hodgins, which I don't know if they will or won't, but if you bring him back, he further adds to the depth. But we all can tell that, they're going to address wide receiver because Sterling Shepard won't be back. Paris Campbell won't be back. We'll see if Bryce Ford Wheaton, remember him from the rookie campaign. We'll see if he's recovered from his injury. But get a number one receiver in here because I really think it's going to make that much of a difference for an offense. Get a guy who can, go deep, who can be a yards after the catch specialist. Get a guy who is physical and who can outmuscle, in the contested catch department. Just get that guy. I know he's got to be out there. And you know what? This draft class coming up is a deep class. And here's the funny thing, eventually I'm going to do a mock draft for you guys because I know you guys are asking me for mock drafts. But if the Giants don't get a quarterback in round 1, which is a possibility if they sit tight, and if Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels all go off the board, before the Giants go on the clock, wouldn't it be nice if the Giants used that 6th-round pick to get a number 1 receiver? Right now, I would say if it's not a quarterback, it's going to be a wide receiver. And I think it just makes too much sense because a wide receiver is really going to help open things up, especially if you are anticipating that you might not have Saquon Barkley on your roster in 2024, right? Remember I talked about earlier in the show, I talked about a potential tag and trade. If that is the intention, now who's your guy on offense that creates headaches for the opposing defense? You don't have one. So wouldn't it behoove you to get that guy? And if you can get him in the draft, put him on a rookie contract, wouldn't that be even better? I think it would. So that's what I would do if I were the GM, which thankfully I'm not because I'll tell you what, Joe Schoen, so many decisions to make and some of them are going to work out. Some of them are not. So it's going to be very fun to cover what roster decisions they make this offseason. After the Super Bowl, of course, we have the lull in the schedule and then free agency and we'll kick up again. In the meantime, we have the All-Star game. So we will have all that coverage for you here on the LockOn Giants podcast. I want to thank you as always for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Again, this is the LockOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and we will see you tomorrow with the interview with Damian Parson, NFL talent evaluator, as we talk draft. Have a good one, Giant fans.